Hello, ladies. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is C. Paul Singh. A very good evening, and thank you all for joining us today at 131 edition of our webinars. We have also organized a number of interactive sessions besides webinar, which are addressed by one expert on the subject. Today's interactive session on implications of China's growing aggressiveness will be addressed by a senior army officer, Major General Tawang. He has a checkered career and had a lot of staff appointments besides being on the front. He will, on the operation, he will address you on this subject and analyze it thoroughly. We have got registration, let me tell you, from the following countries: India, UAE, USA, Dubai, and Singapore. The interest session is sponsored by Premier Investigation, Risk Management Advisory Enterprise, supported by Tax, India Skills, and GMD Cargo Private Limited. After extending hearty welcome to our eminent and learned speaker and other delegates, let me say a few words about NISBAT. NISBAT was established in the year 1990. It started training courses in the field of private security and security management. With the passage of time, now NISBAT has become a big organization with an of more than 85 scholars who are providing inputs in the field of security, safety, and current topics. NISBAT has established 4 important wings. The first NISBAT Forum, which is conducted webinar. The second is NISBAT Enterprises, which undertakes audits and surveys. Third is NISBAT Training and Education, online training, etc. And then we intend to start NISBAT Foundation to undertake welfare and social work for the society at large, particularly concerned with law and order situation. Now, I wanted to say that our moderator and chairman, Mr. Pawan Agriwalia, is unfortunately ill, is not able to join the session. However, we have a moderator today for the session, Major General Deepak Mehta. A word about our today's moderator, Major General Deepak Mehta. Mehta was commissioned in the Rajputana Rifles in March 1972. He has seen active operations in J&K along with the line of control. In command, he commanded an infantry brigade, an infantry battalion in J&K during the height of insurgency, and was also was wounded there. He has a checkered career of 37 years, encompassing command, staff, and instructional appointment. He has had instructional appointment in the premier training establishment of the Army War College and Indian Military Academy. Major General Deepak will moderate this session. Before he starts moderating the session, let me say a few words about the subject as such. That's an introduction about the subject, that the implication of China's growing aggressiveness or growing activism. Now, the geostrategic security environment has recently witnessed a significant change due to China's activism or aggressive postures. China has exhibited its assertive posture in many forms, like not adhering to the laws of seas and navigation and staking claim in South and North China Seas, which affected a large number of countries of Southeast Asia. China's economic and political footprints have expanded quickly. Many countries are trying to grapple with the implication of this growing aggressiveness. Even advanced countries like USA are paying special attention to this aggressive behavior. An elite group was constituted by some countries which were directly affected, that is South China and Philippines and Vietnam and southern country, Vietnam and South Korea. They have said that let this elite group go into the details as to what is the China's aggressiveness, what is China's activism, and how should we deal with it. They say that China's activism affects their state institutions. Their state institutions. They say some of the state institutions which are rather fragile and whose political landscape is weak, they are badly affected by the China's aggressive behavior. China's activism as growing influence, they say, is required to be considered in various dimensions. Number one, how Chinese influence affects the choices and opinions in the local political and economic environment of the country. Very important that their influence affects the choices and opinion in the local political and economic environments of the country. How China's activism constrains the local media. It doesn't allow the local media to flower or blossom. How China's impact the local society. How China's business model has started affecting the regulatory framework to various weak countries. Particularly, they say they have referred to Hungary and some. Now, China's particularly they have referred. You refer to cost. Majority stake in the port of priorities to create a regional logistic hub in the Mediterranean. Not to create a logistic hub in the Mediterranean Sea. This study group has also recommended that we should check China's Trojan horse. It was a little bit, but it has a lot of things inside. Trojan horse, you know, is a word used from the Greeks. So Trojan horse should be avoided. I mean, we should check growing Chinese. Check on Chinese. Promote your own good government. Then build local resilience to deal with growing China, both economically and on the thought process of the country. Do not over-focus on soft power, and then deny at some places China's diplomatic openings. And with these words, I feel that I should leave it to the speaker to analyze broader framework from strategic point of view, from economic point of view, from political point of view, from intellectual point of view. That is how China's activism or aggressiveness has the implication, overall implication. With these words, I'd like to pass on the session to the moderator of today, Major General Deepak Mehta.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. Before I proceed, let me first introduce Mr. Sipal Singh, the president of NESMAT. Mr. Sipal Singh is an ex-IPS officer, Indian Police Service officer, and retired at the rank of Inspector General. He is a master's in English literature and has served in a number of states in prestigious police appointments. He was made responsible by the government of India to raise a new force, that is the Rapid Action Force. And after having raised this force, he was the first chief of the Rapid Action Force. This force was raised primarily to contain communal riots. In recognition to his outstanding career that he's had in the police, he's been awarded a number of awards. They are the President's Police Medal for Distinguished Service, the Indian Police Medal for Meritorious Service, the Police Special Duty Medal that he got twice, and Sena Medal with a number of other recognitions and commendations. After retirement, he was conferred the prestigious award of the Security Personality of the Year by the President of India in the Global Security Conference. Presently, he is the advisor to the Asian Professional Security Association, India Chapter. He is also the Honorary Director General of the Central Association of Private Security Industry, India, and Association of the Private Investigators and Detective in India. Now coming down to General Katoch, who is going to be the speaker of this evening. Major General Dhruv Katoch has been conferred the Sena Medal for Gallantry and also an awardee of the VSN. He is an alumni of the famous Sherwood College of Nainital. He has done his training in the NDA, the IMA, and also the National Defense College. He was commissioned on the 31st of March 1972 into the Dogra Regiment and has a great pride in the fact that he's a third generation officer in the Indian Army. He has master's degree and MPhil in the defense studies and from the University of Madras. He is also a recipient of the Doctorate of Philosophy conferred by the Indian Indira Gandhi University. After nearly close to 4 decades in uniform, in which he has served along all the borders and also had a tenure in Sri Lanka. He retired in 2009. Post-retirement, he joined the premier think tank of the Indian Army, that's the Center for Land Warfare Studies, from 2009 to 2014. The last 3 years of it, he was the director of CLAWS. He has conducted a large number, he has edited a large number of books and also written chapters in a number of books. He is presently the director of the India Foundation and also editor of the Salute magazine. Having known Dhruv for the last 50 years plus, I have no reservations in saying that he is a scholar general. Over to General Katoch for his talk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sipal Singh, President Nismat, and General Mehta for inviting me to share my thoughts on the implications of China's growing aggressiveness. This is a very interesting subject and has much to do with China's self-image, and also of how the common Chinese perceive China's place in the comity of nations. Let me delve a bit here on a human trait referred to as personality. Now, personality is the enduring configuration of characteristics and behavior that comprises an individual's unique adjustment to life, including major traits, interests, drives, values, self-concept, abilities, emotional patterns, etc. Now, what happens if we replace the word individual with country? Now things start to get interesting. Does a country have a personality? And if so, what is the personality of China? What are the configurations of characteristics and behaviors that are unique to and natural for the Chinese people? Now, based on a 3-year-long survey conducted in many countries, the results for China showed that the people exhibited 2 distinct traits. One, there was a deep belief in the ideals of humanism, encompassing altruism, compassion, and understanding. 2, the people showed a preference for order and organization. They preferred certainty and thoroughness, and often judged success in terms of completion of a task. On the macro level, then, it appears that humanism and order are the 2 traits valued by the Chinese people in a great manner. So, if humanism and order constitute the personality of China, why is China perceived as an aggressive and volatile force? Now, this is where the concept of a nation's character comes in. This refers to the shared beliefs or perceptions, and mind you, I'm using the word perceptions, of personality characteristics common to members of a particular nation, both within the nation and outside it. Now, this perception of China in the eyes of its own people and even outside of China is controlled by the Communist Party of China, the CCP. Now, viewed through this lens, the personality of China is not congruent with its character. This has the potential to lead to internal unrest, protest, and displeasure against the ruling dispensation. Hence, we see the heavy propaganda inside and outside of China by the right, who are trying to convince their own people and the outside world that a CCP-run China actually functions in terms of the Chinese personality and is humanistic, orderly, and completes its projects in a timely manner, keeping the good of the people at heart. So the ending of poverty in China is a very important landmark in that country, along with projects such as the One Belt, One Road, the BRI, which are termed as China's humanistic and altruistic outreach. The crackdown on corruption, which you periodically see in China, can also be seen in a similar light. Now, there is also a third characteristic which defines China, and that is its sense of nationalism, grounded in the belief that China was once a great power and that it must regain that status. Now, this sense of nationalism dates back to well before the establishment of the PRC. But it was the PRC which has since 1949 promoted the narrative of the century of humiliation, which is largely conceived as having begun with the first Opium War in 1839, in which the Royal Navy opened up China to Western capitalism, and only ending in 1949 with the PRC coming to power in China. So this discourse reiterates the humiliation of the Chinese people, the dismemberment of territory, the loss of sovereignty to foreign powers, and domestic weakness and corruption. This sense of nationalism also drives China's foreign policy, with the PRC being sensitive to public concerns and taking into account popular nationalist sentiments. Now, let me give you an example. In 2012, when tensions arose over the disputed Senkaku Islands, the Chinese public boycotted Chinese products, linking the same to patriotism. Please remember that the Nanjing massacre, which occurred immediately after the Battle of Nanjing in the Second Sino-Japanese War by the Imperial Japanese Army, and which lasted for complete 6 weeks, beginning in 13 December 1937, still weighs heavily on the Chinese consciousness. It is the Chinese public which is averse to the continuing Japanese practice of honoring of its World War II martyrs at the Yasukuni Shrine. This public vehemence at times outstrips even the hardliners within the PRC government, serving to push policy further towards hawkishness, with netizens criticizing their own country's policymakers for not being aggressive enough. And if China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the MFA, is perceived to be undermining Chinese interests, then they too are subjected to ridicule by the public. Now, two factors indicate this trend. One, I think most people in this audience will be surprised to know that the MFA, that the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, constantly receives calcium pills on a regular basis. This is the popular choice of insult to indicate the spinelessness of their diplomats. And two, in the online world, the MFA has garnered the unofficial nickname, the Ministry of Protests, due to its tendency to do little more than issue denouncements of unfavorable international developments. You can perhaps relate this to the, what we say in India, usne kadi ninda ki hai, often expressed by Indian ministers when terror action takes place. So, humne kadi ninda ki hai. So, China mein bhi wahi ho raha hai. They protest. And the public doesn't like it. The Chinese public says, no, take action. So with this as a background, let us look into Chinese aggressive policies astride its land borders as well as in the Western Pacific. Since early 1990s, when China was pursuing its economic and military growth agenda, it did not want its growth to be seen as threatening to its neighbors. So Beijing resorted to the rhetoric of its peaceful rise and was restrained in its foreign policy options. It engaged with regional multilateral organizations such as ASEAN and also made great effort to promote the so-called win-win relations with neighboring states through trade and investment deals. So China wanted to be at this stage of its life a good boy. But with China's rising clout, there has been a change in its stance over the past decade, with Beijing adopting a more assertive foreign policy line, more confidently pushing back against the US and promoting its own core interests. Now, towards this end, China has not shied away from applying military and other coercive economic and diplomacy leverages. Now, regardless of protests emanating from neighboring states and from the United States, Beijing has intensified the construction of airstrips and military facilities on the artificial islands in the South China Sea and increased the control of fishing and oil exploration activities of neighboring states in their own exclusive economic zones. Furthermore, Beijing has increased the economic, diplomatic, and military pressures on Taiwan and the neighboring states such as the Philippines and Japan, and continues to strengthen its military activities in the East China Sea. Now, these changes are reflective of a weakening unipolar world order taking place concurrently with China's rise. So as China grows, it is pushing back against the US-led international system, and it is promoting its own core interests, applying military and other coercive diplomatic and economic leverages where necessary. Now, it must be remembered here that China's rise took place in a unipolar world. While unipolarity creates strong incentives for states to balance the unipole, there is a cost attached to such balancing, which makes the challenger tread cautiously. And China has treaded cautiously all this time, but as China grew in strength, it resorted to soft balancing. While not directly challenging the United States, it sought to use military and non-military means, such as territorial denial and entangling diplomacy, to delay, frustrate, and undermine US policies. It desisted from hard balancing, which is reflected by military buildup and military alliances, because of the high transaction costs involved. Now, hard balancing is much easier to achieve in a bipolar or a multipolar environment, but in a unipolar environment, hard balancing would be viewed as revisionism and as a dangerous threat to the international order. So that is why Beijing, rather than confronting the United States directly, has fixed its attention to its own neighborhood. In East Asia, while Beijing is confronted with the dominant position which the US occupies, but because of China's strengthened economic and military capabilities, and because of the advantage that accrues to it from geography, it has greater confidence to do something about it. Now, no rising power would want military bases and forward deployed troops of its rivals next to its own borders. And so Beijing is seeking to establish some form of control over its immediate external environment or a sphere of influence around its borders. As the US seeks to preserve its dominance, we see the outlines of a conflict emerging. The difference here is the US is far away from the place of action. It is consequently attempting to expand its diplomatic concerns, its diplomatic, economic, and especially its military influence in the region. The Quad is thus one manifestation of US efforts to keep China in check. But the real story is that a change is in the offing, though it may be many years distant from the present time moment. Essentially, the unipolar dynamics is weakening, and other dynamics are strengthening, presenting Beijing with a variable set of options in which it can maneuver in East Asia. For this, the CCP would rely on the support of its people, in the absence of which its ability to maneuver gets restricted. As the Chinese sense of nationalism provides the necessary level of support to the CCP to pursue its agenda, this will not be too great a constraining factor for the ruling dispensation, though it will have to be sensitive to domestic public opinion. Now, for China, its strategy of promoting amongst its neighbors the idea that China's rise is peaceful and non-threatening has worked well till now. But it has its limitations. This strategy was predicated on US unipolarity, where China was enabled to free ride as it did not have strong economic and security interests outside its own region, which made a low-profile approach possible. With the gradual shift in world power, while China is still not carrying out the hard balancing option with respect to the US, it is increasing soft balancing options and intensifying cost-imposing strategies and the everyday resistance to US power. A look at the Chinese military power indicates that its military modernization has been focused on guarding itself against the most threatening elements of US military power. Now, for this, just look at China's A2AD, that is the anti-access area denial military buildup. This is designed to push US naval and air power further away from the Chinese territory and prevent the US from intervening in the Taiwan Strait, as was the case in the mid-1990s. China now has the military capability to prevent the US military from operating near the Chinese coast and has actually prevented the US military from doing so. The show by China of its anti-ship ballistic missiles in its military parades is also designed to send a very clear message to Washington that China has the capability to sink US aircraft carriers. So, by augmenting its A2AD capabilities, China has raised the cost and the risk for the US to operate its aircraft and ships close to China's near seas. So China is also attempting to shape international developments by increasing activities in setting the agenda in multilateral organizations without directly confronting the US. For this, it's worthwhile to note that in a conference on confidence building measures in Asia, which was held in Shanghai in 2014, Xi Jinping outlined the Chinese ideas about the future security structures in Asia and emphasized that strong military alliances, making an obvious reference to the US, would be opposed. Now, this is the first time since the end of the Cold War that a Chinese leader has so clearly questioned the US role in regional security. In the economic sphere as well, China has formulated clearer responses and alternatives to the US-led regional free trade agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. Now, how did China respond? They responded with the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, the RCEP, which was concluded in 2020, albeit without India. So China's BRI, that is the Belt and Road Initiative, has to be seen in this light. To maintain its position, the US launched its pivot or rebalance to Asia under the Obama administration and now is invigorating the Quad. But the US strategy has been a bit incoherent, which has resulted in uncertainty in US allies and partners about the extent of US engagement and commitments. So this scenario is still playing out, and we will see in the years to come how it actually pans out. A word here about the internal power dynamics in China is in order. Now, we all know that China maintains an authoritarian political system with no opposition to the Chinese Communist Party. But many developments in the system have taken place which could upset this balance. Now, the 4 Chinese modernizations which have been underway over the last 4 decades have seen rapid economic developments in China, which has huge implications for Chinese society and its relationship with the CCP. In order to continue the economic reform process, certain adjustments of the Chinese political and bureaucratic systems have been necessary, including the need to gradually allow more room for Chinese societal actors, encouraging private initiative and entrepreneurship, and a higher degree of flexibility and dynamism in the Chinese economy. Consequently, a more diverse and active Chinese society has developed, where critical voices regarding developments in and outside China have emerged. In addition, the Chinese society has become increasingly capable of showing its disappointment and anger, as well as taking advantage of the spread of new social media platforms and communication technologies. Put simply, China's spectacular economic growth has produced sweeping societal changes which have the potential to challenge the CCP's capacity to rule. So we now see that the CCP leadership is preoccupied with maintaining domestic control and legitimacy, and is quite prepared to use increasingly repressive methods to deal with the situation. Consequently, the efforts to reinvigorate the societal support to the Chinese party state have therefore also been intensified. You will see increased propaganda on this account. Now here, it must be noted that since the start of the economic reform process in China, that happened sometime in the late 70s, the ideological legitimacy of the Chinese leadership has been gradually undermined and replaced with a performance legitimacy. The Chinese leaders must continuously deliver on domestic stability, economic growth, growing prosperity, and higher standards of living. Furthermore, they must fulfill the growing domestic expectations about regaining great power, influence, status, and respect. This is what they have pledged to do in their social contract with the Chinese population. It is still their main claim on legitimacy of the CCP leaders led by Xi Jinping, but it is getting more difficult to deliver while the expectations from the Chinese society are only growing. So the relative decline of the US power in East Asia has further increased the nationalist ambitions and expectations in parts of the Chinese population that China now will stand up and take what is seen as its rightful great power position and demand great power status and respect. This growing nationalist sentiment will constrain Chinese foreign policy choices, forcing it on a more belligerent path and reducing room for maneuver. Now, this was evident in the 2012 anti-Chinese protests in China that flared up after Japan had taken the decision to nationalize 3 of the contested Senkaku Islands. These were a group of 5 islets and 3 barren rocks, about 200 miles off the Chinese coast, northeast of Taiwan, which are claimed by China, Taiwan, and Japan, but which are in the de facto control of Japan. So in practice, Chinese leaders have been satisfied to declare Chinese sovereignty over the islands and to criticize Japanese efforts to demonstrate Japan's sovereignty claims, the Kadi Ninda which I mentioned earlier, while not actually taking steps to challenge Japan's de facto control over the islands. I think this will now stand changed with heightened concerns among the CCP to meet the people's demands. We now see nationalism in China projecting to Chinese claims in the surrounding areas and being linked to the domestic legitimacy of Chinese ruling clique. An assertive foreign policy has economic consequences. The relative weight that the Chinese leaders place on legitimacy derived through economic growth versus legitimacy derived by achieving nationalistic goals will be an important factor in the development in East Asian politics and security in the years to come. In the present environment, there are clearly complex and continuously changing dynamics between the top-down nationalism and the bottom-up nationalism in China. Under Xi Jinping, the CCP has promoted a more uncompromising nationalism and been more willing to accept risks, including domestically, to advance what are seen as Chinese legitimate rights and claims. This is further combined with a tightening of political control and party discipline, inclining Chinese officials at all levels to take a tough nationalist stand. So, we find Chinese diplomats are both reacting to a more nationalist public opinion and also seeking to satisfy their superiors and follow the party line. So rather than having a satisfying and calming effect on the people or the bottom-up nationalism, it is only further strengthening in such a context. The top-down nationalism and the bottom-up nationalism in China are thus interdependent and tend to mutually reinforce each other. In China, national rejuvenation under Xi Jinping is the clarion call of a civilizational state. It is both flexible in its ideological scope and expandable in its territorial ambitions. Importantly, the nationalist rationale of the rejuvenation construct is not sourced from narratives of victimhood suffered during the century of humiliation, but is located in the glory of an imagined past and is thereby both more assertive and aggressive in its orientation. In addition to being a nationalist project, national rejuvenation is equally a personal investment by Xi Jinping. Successful reclamation of every entity and ideal that belongs to the landscape of rejuvenation to feel his position as the leading figure within the CCP pantheon. Therefore, China's increasing bellicosity towards Taiwan needs to be located within the dynamics of CCP's political expediency, Chinese nationalism, and Xi's ambitions. We can thus expect greater belligerence from China in the years to come. Both the South China Sea and the East China Sea will see increasing militarization, though China will seek to avoid direct military confrontation and use non-military methods to realize the goal of national rejuvenation, and thereby the resolution of the Taiwan question. The ASEAN countries will attempt some form of rapprochement with China on their respective claim lines. But Japan will in all probability dramatically increase its defense budget and seek parity with Chinese naval and air power over the oceans. I had a talk a few years back with some of the Japanese delegates, and when I gave them this proposition, they told me Japan will never do it because it is forbidden in their constitution. And I think it was about 8 or 9 years back, I told them, you will change your constitution. They laughed at me. But believe you me, Japan will change its constitution. For India, we have the advantage of geography in the Indian Ocean region, but would have to ensure an effective naval presence to guard our interests. The Quad serves India's security interests, though it is not yet a security grouping. On India's border with Tibet, it is a conflict which India will have to fight alone, though help in the form of intelligence or perhaps material support will in all likelihood come from the US and other Western partners. The key factor in any war over the Himalayas will be cyber and space capability and control over the skies over the Tibetan plateau. So long as India is prepared, China will be reluctant to take on a military adventure, which she may well lose. Internal stability, economic growth, military preparedness, and astute diplomacy thus will be the essential components of India's response to Chinese belligerence. With this, I conclude my talk. And now I'll be happy to take on any questions on any aspect which has not been covered so far. Thank you.
Dhruv, you had given a wonderful talk. I think John has a question to ask. John, could you please take the question? You're unmute yourself, John. You're muted. Yeah. Your question, please.
Yeah. The question I would ask directly out of place of today. We should in foreign policy and diplomacy, there are no permanent friends or enemies. So collectively, India and China should think that are they being stupid by fighting over a piece of uninhabited land while they have a chance of multiplying trade and emerging as the number one and number two in the world economy? What are your and sooner or later, China and India will both realize doormats. What is your opinion on that?
Right. Thank you. Actually, your voice was getting cut, but I've got the essence of your question. So if I missed out something, please let me know. You know, essentially, when you look at the India-China equation, theoretically, if Tibet as a country still existed and was a buffer between the two countries, I think we would have been the best of friends and allies. Now that situation doesn't pertain any longer. China has occupied Tibet, and now we have a land border on the Himalayas. China, unfortunately, desires to control the complete Himalayan range because control of the Himalayan range gives it control over the waters which flow down towards India. And if you control the waters, you control the land down below. That is China's ultimate aim. China has made it very clear, one mountain cannot hold two tigers. And in their philosophy, they are the tigers, and India will have to play second fiddle. India too is a civilizational state, and India is not going to play second fiddle to China. Unfortunately, it takes two hands to clap. And while India is prepared to extend that hand of friendship, I don't think China is prepared to take it. They seek total dominance. That is the situation as of now. So for India, I think the best policy option as of today is to remain strong enough to defeat any Chinese misadventure over the Himalayas. And for that, as I mentioned in my talk, the key is not the Indian army. The key is cyber capability and a stronger air force over the Tibetan plateau. If the war has to be fought on the Himalayas, I'm afraid we are already on the receiving end. The war has to be fought and won deep inside Tibetan territory on the skies. You win the air war, you will win the ground war. It cannot proceed beyond that. So we have to ensure a stronger air force over the Tibetan plateau. We have to ensure essential cyber and space capabilities and missile capabilities. And if we do that to deter China, there will be no war. And that is what we should actually aim to do. Friendship is an ideal situation. I don't think it is going to come about in the near future with the present Chinese dispensation. However, the people of China I'm very sanguine. They have a very soft corner towards India, as perhaps the people of India have towards the people of China. It is the dispensation, the ruling elite in China, which I think is the cause of the problem. I hope that answers it to some extent.
Any other question, please?
Purvinder Singh. Purvinder Singh has raised a hand. Purvinder Singh. Go ahead, Purvinder Singh. Unmute yourself.
Yes. I am P.S. Mauji, Purvinder Singh Mauji. Very comprehensive talk we heard. But you see that still our concern remains. The China developing villages just close to the line of actual control, number one. And claim some towns in Arunachal Pradesh already. How do we solve this kind of a problem? How to reach or how to do this? These are two very important things that they're already doing it. So then what is our then resources to, if something happens, some war happens, what will our resources then?
Right. Now, very frankly, ever since 1947, and I'll tell you the roots of the problem. I'm not going to get into the political aspect of it. So my comments are not politically related to what happened with the earlier dispensations or the present dispensation, which is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, India refused to build infrastructure on the Himalayas post-independence on grounds which I think can be bordering on treason. And the grounds were, and please take it from me, this is the actual reason, They said, if we build roads right up to the line of actual control or the border or whatever you wish to call it, the Chinese can use it to come to Delhi. So we will not build any roads. The point is, it is true that a road can come to Delhi, but that same road can go to Beijing. वो सोच में फर्क होना चाहिए था. वो हमारी सोच बहुत डिफेंसिव रही. We didn't build anything on Arunachal.
Yes.
For people like me who have commanded a division there, it was a very sorry state of affairs. As a general officer commanding, for me to get to Bumla, it was a very rickety ride. But my Chinese counterpart could come on a metal road, in minutes. So the situation has changed over the last 5 years, 5 to 7 years, I would say, where more than 2,500 kilometers of roads have now been constructed. Now, the thing was that if you look at the map of Arunachal Pradesh, especially on the eastern edge, the Chinese have built a road right up to the McMahon line. And then they have crossed over it actually in 1 or 2 places. Now, their road has come up and obviously they've settled some people there. The Indian road from that point is still 20 kilometers away. For us, our patrol takes 1 day to reach. So there have been problems, but those problems are being rectified. There is no way in which you can kick them out from where they are. That is point number 1. But I think it is equally important to understand that the key result area is not on eastern Arunachal Pradesh, what we call in the army RALP, or the rest of Arunachal Pradesh. The key area.
Dharav, you are muted. Dharav, please unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. I was saying the key area for India is still Tawang. And that is what the Chinese claim. Now, why Chinese claim Tawang is because it can give them a leverage to tell the Tibetan people, we have got Tawang back for you. Now, Tawang is something which we are not going to give to them. They will have to fight for it. They will have to lose hundreds of thousands of men to get it. And even then, there is no assurance that they will get it. So that is something out of the question. So this conflict will remain. On East, the same situation obtained in Eastern Ladakh. We didn't build our roads. We didn't build our infrastructure. Today, when you see the Doklam crisis, please take it from me, the key result area was the Indian Air Force deployment there. China doesn't have an answer to that. Because if push comes to shove and there is a war, it will be fought first in the air. And I don't think China can face the humiliation of losing 50 to 100 aircraft. So you will have a peace. But this liberal action of China will have to be...
We're a little short of time. Vice Admiral Murthylaran wants to ask you a question. Yeah. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, General Katoch and General Mehta. Very comprehensive, but you mentioned it in passing. Now, as you are aware, China has been making, the PLA Navy has been making increasing presence in the Indian Ocean region, and they've also been looking for bases all around India, including in Sri Lanka, where they've developed a port and trying to get it on a long-term lease because of the, they're not being able to pay off the money. So while Indian Navy has started in some ways mission-based deployment further away, in your view, increasing presence of our Navy in the South China Sea and in the, all on in the maritime side of China, would it not also bring in some kind of pressure on China that we can always do a tit for tat if she ventures too much into the Indian Ocean? It could probably also ease some pressure on the land borders. Your views, please.
Actually, very frankly, Vice Admiral Murthylaran, my view is that the two issues, our land borders and what happens on the oceans will be two unrelated issues. These things will be fought separately. As far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, I think we need to maintain a very strong grip on the Malacca Straits, which is why, what we do in the Andamans, I think is of very great interest. We have got our second aircraft carrier. We are going in for additional submarines. We need to have dominance in the Indian Ocean region. Now, can we maintain that level of dominance? At the moment, I think we are okay. But 10 years from now, I have very serious reservations about India's naval capabilities unless we pump in much more money and resources to the Navy because the key battles are going to be, or the key dominant areas, the decision moments will be there actually in the oceans and not in the mountains. Mountains we are in a position to handle. So we would need to really buttress our naval capability. I'm glad the second aircraft carrier has come. We are not going in for a third. We are going in for submarines. I hope we do get some nuclear submarines. But we are in a very dominant position basically because of geography. We should be grateful that we have the perfect geography, which regardless of what China does, they will not be able to match. And with the Western Quad also coming up, I think the situation will remain in our favor. I don't think the government of India is going to allow a situation by which the Chinese Navy will have a predominant role to play in the Indian Ocean region. We need to increase our defense budget, certainly, as far as our naval capacity and capability is concerned. That is my short answer. In my view.
Sorry, HSK, I'm sorry. This is the last question. I'll be short of time. I'll request the President to sum up, please.
You asked General S.P. Singh, he says because of General Katoch said because of our borders and our ecology or geography, probably China will not be able to impact us much. Let's have a opinion and word from General S.P. Singh on this. Can you just, General?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sipal Singh. Before that, I want to say, this very distinguished crowd of 40, and Deepak and Dhruv can understand, they've been a very distinguished lot, running on parallel lines all the time. Dhruv, it's been an excellent presentation, great show. You see, as far as mountains are concerned, well, we cannot wipe out the mountains. They will remain a major threat, and we have to have an impregnable defense there. We've got to have an offensive defense there. The offensive core which has come up is a step in the right direction. Increasing our non-kinetic resources is most essential. What is important is that we should avoid getting into any kinetic war with China on our northern frontiers. Galwan was one issue. China did back off at a point of time, and we should continue to increase our infrastructure development. And both, as Dhruv said, defense budget, I said combining the both, actually we have to increase our economic effort. We have to make us economy strong. And one of the major factors for making the economy strong is, our arms front to become an arms exporter. And we are doing that. And the recent, docking of the US ship has got our shipyard or the shipping industry right into the global market. So I think these are the fronts which we have made. Mountains, I feel that we have to control China with our resources being increased there. And Dhruv has again brought out the Air Force. There's a news about the Tu-160 Russian 6 pieces coming. So those are the steps which are in the right direction. So I would add that much, sir, for your consideration.
Thank you, General. Thank you. Come on, Deepak, go ahead. Come on, Deepak, go ahead.
Sir, no, time is a little short now. I'll request you to conclude the session, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Well, I would not like to say more than one line. That's not only a very comprehensive, very, very elaborate is there, of course, but very, very competent and very, very efficient and very, very overall approach has been there by General Katoch. Thank you very much, General Katoch. You gave a very nice presentation, and you started that China wanted to be a good boy. And this was when you started, was our intent to become a good boy. But we hope that nationalism sort of thing, which you said, Peter is giving, and nationalism probably making them naughty boys instead of good boys. Because everywhere, China's growing media influence is affecting other countries. In countries like Hungary, It has embraced close ties with China. And you know that Chinese influence in Hungary, being in the heart of Europe, can adversely affect the European powers also. At the same time, you also know that the track record of China dealing with other countries on equal footing is poor. So there are dangers, and we have to strengthen our own state institutions, our civil society institution, our land border laws, our land border. All this has to do to India is concerned. By and large, the activism of China is not only, as I said, only on the strategic point of view. It is influencing the intellectual content, it is influencing the ideas. Conspicuous institutions have been raised as certificate, giving the idea what Confucius said to China, that they want to be dominant, they want to be big brother. So this is the danger which is there, apparent, but at the same time, I mean, as far as the Indian impact is concerned, I'm sure that India knows the impact with brilliant people in the army like you and as we saying there. Because acquiring ports in Pakistan, acquiring ports in Sri Lanka, acquiring ports in Djibouti in Africa, and they by the Chinese indicate that they are going to have a strategic areas of interest in large, where the ports they have acquired. Again, economic aid which they are providing to countries like Pakistan, to countries like Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, which are close to India and can directly affect the strategic security environment of India to the extent of even sometimes affecting our policy towards Afghanistan. They are the looming dangers. We have to be careful about it. With these words, I thank you very much for having come here and discuss at length what could be the impact China's activism in India, but other countries, and how they are countering USA also. With these words, thank everyone. Banner, please. The next. Our next webinar is hybrid working and impact on the team leadership.
Very important for you.
It's a very interesting subject. Nowadays, everywhere we're started and brought it to hybrid working. So hybrid working can have an impact on the teamwork leadership. Speakers are Lieutenant Dr. Prakash Menon, another brilliant Army officer, commandant of the National Defense Academy, and also was a member of the National Security Council of the Government of India. He is one. The second speaker is Shri Karthik Rana. He's a very senior management consultant, an ex-CEO of the foods business, and he is one of those who is globally known for his management techniques, which he has been, innovative management techniques which he has been propagating. These are the two speakers. They will be addressing this webinar. I request you, all who are present here, to be with us on 26th of August at 6 p.m. again, 6 to 7:30, because that session is going to be webinar by two speakers, 6 to 7:30 p.m. With these words, I once again thank everyone who have come here this evening, and particularly our lead speaker. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. An excellent exposition of by you here.
That's true.
He left.
He's gone. He's gone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you,
Thank
General
you.
Mehta, after some time. Yeah, good to see you.
General S.V. Singh is going to be our next speaker somewhere in some next webinar. I think he'll give thought to it.
Thank you.
SVP sir, we're looking for your topic now.
Yes, I'm going to be more interactive with you, Deepak, after this.
Sir,
And,
thanks.
Pick on the threads of excellence which Nismat has been presenting ever since I think the Galwan issue took off. And to that extent, I have tried to follow quite a few of them. And really grateful to Mr. Sipal Singh, to Pavanjit, and to you, Deepak. You've also been a bedrock there.
Thank you, sir.
And I think these are sessions of intellectual stimuli and excellence, I can say. We gain so much from it at no cost basis. So we are I'm very grateful too.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. We are in need of light. I'm overwhelmed with your affection and